It is a pleasure to be here. I grew very fond of Mohammed and his work and the work you all are doing very quickly. And even though I started joining this meeting, when I joined this meeting, I knew almost I knew almost nobody. After hearing the presentations of Dr. Dina, Dr. Sarah, Dr. Amal, I started to feel like I was amongst old friends. So that's just a wonderful feeling. And I think you will see that the ideas that I have been developing and spreading across the globe are very compatible with the work you're doing. And I'm hoping that the ideas I will present here will offer some frames or some ideas, concepts to look at the important work you're doing, to understand it better, and to probably try to find the path forward, what's next. I have had the pleasure of working over the past 20 years in education, but also in working in very different worlds, in pairs of worlds that are usually very different. I have worked at the grassroots level, promoting pedagogical innovation across many rural schools in Mexico, but I have also been working with whole systems, with Michael Fullen, with whole system reform. So I am familiar with the bottom-up kind of change, but also with change from the top and what effective change looks like when it starts at the bottom of a system or at the top of a system. I have had a lot of links and relationships both to practice and to academia. I keep one foot on each of them, right? So I stay connected to practice. I continue to produce academic work at the same time. I have been involved both at the social justice field, but also in school improvement. And I have had the pleasure of working both in the global south and the global north. And what I have been trying to do with my work is to bring together these pairs of worlds and see what we can learn from each other. I do think that the global south right now is showing tremendous promise to lead the way when it comes to changing education. And what I will be presenting here first are core ideas around my most recent book, Liberating Learning. Then I want to put those ideas into conversation with the first framework and how I think they overlap and in which ways they are compatible and how they can we can start a conversation between the two. And third, I just wanted to offer a handful of principles of action as to what to do in these times of pandemic, how to go about dealing with and navigating and leveraging the times of pandemic. So let me start with a very simple proposition, a very simple, concise proposition. And it's this: learning is a practice of freedom. When I hear Dr. Dina and Sarah and Amal talk about the learning that the adults they're working with and their students are experiencing, this is what comes to mind. Learning is a practice of freedom. That's fundamentally what good, powerful learning is about. And I think all of us have experienced in some way what it means to learn something powerfully, deeply, personally, in a way that's personally transformative. And when we think about that, I think we can connect to freedom, to the fact that we learned what we know how to do best and what we love to do in conditions of freedom. If we were to think briefly about the things we're very good at, it can be anything, baking or cooking or dancing or playing an instrument or singing or playing a sport or telling jokes or making friends or communicating in public. There are certain aspects in common to powerful learning experiences. They include, for example, interest. So we learn well what we're interested in learning. Exposure, we learn best by being exposed to the expert practice of those who are good at doing the things we want to learn to do. We learn through constant practice, through making mistakes and trial and error and getting better over time. We learn through feedback and constant reflection on what's working, what isn't, how we can do things differently, etc. And we learn through collaboration, working with others in groups, etc. I think these are, in summary, the 6 core conditions for powerful learning. And the bad news is that this is not what we see in schools. In most of our education institutions, even though this is what we know and what we believe about powerful learning, that these are the conditions to learn deeply. And even though I think we all know, at least intuitively, that learning is a practice of freedom, this is very different from what happens in schools. In schools, we fundamentally learn to be taught. And that means we learn to sit quietly, to listen to what the teacher has to say, and to do as we are told. That's what we learn to do very well in schools. We learn to be taught. It is about placing the responsibility for our learning someone else, in the teacher who will teach us. But we are passive. The teacher is the one who tells us and has the authority to tell us what is true, what is beautiful, what is correct, and what is good. The problem is that, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I think learning to be taught is an important thing to learn. But the thing to highlight and the message I want to communicate here is that learning to be taught and learning to learn, they are two very different things. Because learning to learn is about taking ownership of the learning, about being on the driver's seat, on being the one who decides what is true, what is good, what is correct, what is beautiful, not outside. The truth resides within us, or God resides within us, if I were to put it in religious terms, and it can never be come to us externally. It has to come from connecting with our own sense of truth and goodness and beauty. So learning to be taught and learning to learn are two very different things. And as I was saying, learning to be taught is an important thing to learn. But when that's most of what we learn in school, we end up being disabled to learn on our own, to learn as a practice of freedom. If I were to put it differently, when we think about how we learn best, and when we look at the literature on the neuroscience of learning, we realize that what we believe and we know about powerful learning and what we do in schools, they're two very different things. Again, in schools, we learn to be taught. But what we believe and know about powerful learning is about the conditions of freedom that we need to learn deeply and to learn in powerful ways. If we look at what schools were designed to do and what historically has been the role of schooling, I think it will not be very surprising that actually when looked at from the lens of learning, schools are not really very good technologies, or do not have very good technologies to promote it. It won't come as a surprise. Historically, schooling, compulsory schooling, has fulfilled three major functions. One is custody, taking care of children while the parents are working. Second one is control, creating a sense of social control that emerged in the moment, it was a need that emerged in the times of the Industrial Revolution, where massive waves of immigration were coming into the emerging cities for the adults to work in factories. With these massive waves of immigration, it was very important to have a mechanism of social control, and schools became the technology, the vehicle to promote some social control and prevent the chaos that could come from massive waves of immigration coming into the emerging cities. And sorting, selecting students based on certain measures of merit to decide which opportunities will be available for whom. These are the functions that schooling has been able to fulfill in a pretty reliable way and historically for the past century. But when it comes to learning, it becomes a very imperfect and constraining institution for learning of the kind that I'm trying to articulate here. I wanted to introduce this key concept, which I believe is very important when it comes to changing education and to promote powerful learning. This is the basic unit that needs to be transformed, the pedagogical core. By pedagogical core, I basically mean the relationship between an educator and a learner in the presence of knowledge. This is fundamentally where learning happens or not. This is where learning happens or not. In this relationship, you can change the schedules in a school, you can create a new curriculum, you can start to evaluate teachers, you can create standardized testing, you can invest in technology, you can do a lot of things and throw lots of things into education institutions. Yet, if the pedagogical core doesn't change, the learning doesn't change either. So this is where learning happens or not. That's it. And that's why it's so important to change it. And historically, the pedagogical core in schools and in education institutions looks more or less like this. It looks like a clear separation in the relationship between the one who knows and the one who doesn't, the one who says what has to be done and the one who obeys, who does as they're told. This is what the relationships in the conventional instructional core look like. But what we know, and it's becoming increasingly clear from the research on neuroscience and on learning, is that powerful learning does not really happen this way. It happens this way, in dialogue, in conversations. And that's why I'm so heartened to hear the testimonies that Dr. Dina and Zara and Amal are sharing with us, because that's what they're doing. They're changing the pedagogical core so that the relationships are not like this, they're more like this. They're in dialogue, they're conversation, they're relationships of care, of solidarity, of careful listening and supporting. They're like this, not like this. Now, this has implications not only for learning, but for democracy. The pedagogical core actually is not only where learning happens or not, that's where democracy happens or not. If our kids and people in education institutions are fundamentally exposed to relationships that look like this, what you're cultivating over time, even though probably unintentionally, is the mindsets, the behaviors, the attitudes that are required for dictatorships, for authoritarian regimes. But democracies require a set of relationships or mindsets that can be better cultivated like this, in dialogue, in conversation, where both parts learn from each other and influence each other. That's what robust democracies are. When it's not the state over the citizens. It is citizens and state learning from each other and influencing each other in dialogue, in conversation. And the same applies to good pedagogy. So the pedagogical core is important because that's where learning and democracy happen, or not. And I think we're living in times where we cannot take democracy for granted. Democracies are crumbling everywhere. Even in the United States, look at the UK, they are crumbling. And we have a very important role as educators in building the mindsets, the behavior that will be required to bring democracies back to life and make them thrive. The good news is that we can do that by simply focusing most of our effort in changing the pedagogical core. And we will be doing two things simultaneously: promoting powerful learning on the one hand, and building democracies, robust democracies on the second hand. Now, this idea is very simple. We all know or have a sense of how powerful learning occurs. The pedagogical core and changing it, I think it makes a lot of sense. It's a simple idea, yet it runs very counter. It runs counter. These ideas run counter to the conventional culture of schooling. They go against the grain. They're countercultural in nature. And so changing the pedagogical core is not only a technical matter, it's a political and a cultural matter. It's about changing the culture of schooling fundamentally, from relationships that are like this to relationships that are like this. Between teachers and students, between school leaders and teachers, between policy and practice, we have to shift relationships from patterns that look like this to patterns that look like this, like horizontal relationships of mutual learning and influence. So because the problem is a problem of changing the culture, fundamentally, deeply changing the culture of schooling, and not only in depth, but also in a widespread manner, I argue, and this is something that I've been studying and learning and promoting over the past several years, that the best vehicles to change culture, to transform the culture, the most effective vehicles that humans have to their disposal, or that humanity has used, the best vehicles for cultural renewal, for cultural transformation, have been social movements. Historically, that's been the role of social movements. And here I'm not talking about social movements for their kind of protest and violent aspect of the activity of social movements. I'm talking about social movements as powerful vehicles for deep and widespread cultural transformation. And what I've been arguing in my most recent book is that because social movements have historically served as the most powerful vehicles for cultural transformation, they offer many clues as to what it will take to change the pedagogical core fundamentally, so that it focuses on building powerful learning, nurturing powerful learning, and building robust democracies. In the logic of operation of social movements, I think lie many of the keys as to what we need to do to make sure that our good, powerful learning, liberating learning experiences are not only a handful here and there, but that they become the new way of operating, the new normal across our educational institutions. This is not just theoretical elucubration. I have been supporting and learning about and studying several attempts in the Global South in particular that have been successful at changing the pedagogical core at scale. I'm talking about the Learning Community School in Mexico, Learning Community Project in Mexico, Escuela Nueva in Colombia, the Activity-Based Learning Project in the state of Tamil Nadu in India, and community schools in Egypt actually. None of them are, or not all of them are currently active. But these are all examples that started all the way from the 70s in the case of Escuela Nueva in Colombia to more recently the Learning Community Project and the Activity-Based Learning Project in India that started as grassroots pedagogical change initiatives in a handful of schools and spread over time in a few years to thousands of schools, 9,000 schools in Mexico, 20,000 schools in Colombia, 38,000 schools in India, over hundreds of schools in Egypt. These are initiatives, again, that start with very progressive child-centered pedagogies at their core, and then they spread to thousands of schools, hundreds, thousands of schools. And when people have been studying these initiatives, they are starting to realize, and they say, this is not conventional policy. These are not just projects. These are social movements. That's how they operate. So again, not just a theoretical elucubration. We have examples in the Global South of initiatives that operate as social movements and are changing the pedagogical core fundamentally and at scale across thousands of schools in their countries. What these initiatives are doing is to replace the grammar of schooling with the grammar of learning. 5 ideas to liberate learning in an unfolding pandemic. I am aware I have like 2 minutes, so I'll just do that very quickly. First, safety and survival first. Let's make sure that our first focus is to make sure that people we work with are safe and are surviving, that are coping. That's the most important priority. We're in times of emergency, and this is the most important thing to attend to. The idea to keep it simple, instead of trying to bombard kids now with the online kind of frenzy to bring teaching online, keep it simple. Think about the 2 or 3 most important habits of mind, skills that you want to cultivate in the people you work with and in your adults, and focus all your effort on those 2 or 3 things. Don't try to cover the whole curriculum. Don't worry about that. Focus on 2 or 3 most important habits of mind, skill sets to develop. This is, I take from my very good friend, Mohammed Bagad, pedagogy and experience before technology. Technology cannot be the driver of change. It is relationships. It is pedagogy and learning experience that has to be on the driver's seat. Technology can accelerate, can support, but on the co-driver's seat. The driving seat has to be taken by pedagogy and learning experience. Do not waste a good crisis. We suddenly found ourselves in a time where no schools are available. And with that also comes freedom from the constraints that schools have imposed into good, powerful learning. There's no schedules anymore. There's no exams. There's none of that anymore. So this is a phenomenal opportunity for kids to explore things that matter to them over extended periods of time without the worry that they need to move from one class to the next, etc. So do not waste a good crisis. This is a great opportunity to start liberating learning in real time now. And the whole idea that nobody has right now the right strategy. Nobody knows what to do. No one has the perfect solution to our current problems because no one had faced problems of this scale before. So part of the work is to act, learn, and get better as we go. Just start acting with the best you have right now, learn quickly, and get better over time. Quick 3 ideas about how I see the first framework and the ideas in my current book connecting. First, one thing I love about first framework is that it's one of the few examples, few initiatives, few projects that I have seen that are grounded on a solid understanding on how people learn best. Such a simple idea, yet many education institutions and professional learning organizations and school systems, etc., tend to take for granted that learning will just happen if you tell people what to do, right? The first framework offers a very sound framework, a very sound framework to enact a sound theory of how people learn best. And that's one of the most important contributions that the framework is making. 3 core ideas that I wanted to leave here. I think the first framework can be used both conservatively and transformatively. From so the tension I want to name here. What about how to what extent are we using the first framework to deliver powerful learning experience to learners, as opposed to cultivating the habits, the mindsets, the skills to learn by themselves? Right. So to what extent are we just delivering powerful learning experience? To what extent are we actually cultivating the ability of people to learn on their own without needing actually a facilitator? Is it a matter of making the status quo better, or about changing the status quo? And is it a matter of just fostering discrete, bounded, powerful learning experiences, or changing entire cultures and systems? And those are the questions that I raised and that I would like to enter in conversation with the work you guys have been doing from now on. These are the things I would love to start exploring more with you. I wanted to finish with this quick quote from the Stoic Emperor, a guy I follow on Twitter, and I think it highlights what our role in education and those of us involved in the learning world is right now. For over a century, sapiens has tried to make himself or herself like a machine. He has learned to arrive on time. He has learned to repeat after the teacher. He has learned to do repetitious tasks reliably. In summary, we have learned to be taught. Machines are now better at being machines than sapiens is. So sapiens must now relearn how to be human. I believe that's the nature of the beast. That's the nature of the work we have to do. I'm very heartwarmed to hear the testimonies from Dr. Zina, Sarah, Dr. Amal, because what they are bringing to light is what it means to become human again through learning. I will leave it there. This is my most recent book. You will find my email, contact information, my website as well. And in this slide, I will ask Mohammed to share these slides with you so you can have them available as well. But I will leave it there. Thank you very much.